There comes a moment in a woman's life when she wakes up to the realization that kindness without limits doesn't make her more lovable, it makes her invisible. It's subtle in the beginning. You nod your head, offer a soft smile, and say yes when deep inside your spirit is screaming no. You don't do it out of genuine desire. You do it to avoid the weight of someone else's disappointment, believing that keeping the peace is somehow more important than keeping your own. You extend yourself again and again, making sure everyone is okay, even as you're quietly crumbling under the pressure. You wear your discomfort like it's an accessory no one else needs to notice. You believe that your patience, your endless giving, your selflessness is love. But something inside you begins to shift. It's not loud at first. It's a whisper, a soft internal nudge that says, enough. Not because you've become harsh or jaded, but because you've begun to see the difference between being kind and being compliant. You begin to recognize how often your willingness to bend has been mistaken for permission to break you. People didn't respect your boundaries because you never firmly drew them. They didn't recognize your limits because you kept stretching them further and further to accommodate their comfort. You now understand that the only way people can honor your limits is if you first claim them, speak them, and stand by them. And so you make a decision. You finally draw the line. You say it out loud, I will not be treated this way anymore. And that declaration, that tiny revolution within your soul, it changes everything. Some people walk away, and at first it stings. Not just because you're losing relationships, but because those relationships were built on a version of you that was never complete. They weren't drawn to your authenticity. They were attached to your silence, your agreeableness, your willingness to stay small for their convenience. They'll say you've changed. They'll call you names. Cold, difficult, selfish. But you know that none of those labels reflect the truth. This transformation isn't about becoming hard. It's about becoming clear. You've learned that clarity about your worth, your needs, your limits isn't cruelty. It's wisdom. And wisdom comes with a cost. For far too long, you wore the identity of the fixer, the forgiver, the woman who always showed up when it was inconvenient, who sacrificed sleep, peace, and dreams to be what everyone else needed. You were dependable, you were loyal, but you were also slowly losing yourself. The more you gave, the more was expected. The quieter you were, the more they demanded. That's the hidden cost of people-pleasing. It makes you feel needed but never fully known. It earns you temporary approval, but strips away your authenticity. And one day, you stop. You stop apologizing. You stop explaining. You stop chasing the approval of people who only appreciated the version of you that didn't take up space. You stop being the nice girl. Not the kind girl, not the loving woman, but the one who mistook self-erasure for compassion. And in that moment, something sacred begins to rise within you. You start reclaiming your voice. You say, I matter too. You speak up when it's uncomfortable. You walk away when it's toxic. You refuse to sit quietly when your spirit wants to rise and stand. And as you step into this new strength, you don't need to argue. You don't need to shout. Your presence changes, your silence changes, your energy shifts, and they feel it. They notice. They hesitate. They pause before making another demand, because now they know there are consequences. Not punishment, not vengeance. Just a quiet, sacred refusal to be mistreated again. God didn't create you to be someone's emotional doormat. He didn't call you to break yourself into pieces so others could feel whole. There's no glory in being emotionally empty while pretending to be spiritually strong. That's not humility, that's harm. Sometimes love looks like distance. Sometimes love sounds like no. Sometimes love means walking away, not out of hatred but out of reverence for your own soul. And there is no shame in that. You weren't created to survive on fragments. You were made to live in fullness. You stop trying to win people over with your silence. You begin to see how often your kindness has been mistaken for passivity. And that realization doesn't make you bitter, it makes you aware. You now understand that love built on the foundation of your silence was never real love. It was comfort for others and sacrifice for you. You remember the moments you said yes just to avoid being misunderstood. You nodded, you smiled, and you complied. Not out of agreement, but because being liked felt safer than being questioned. But now you know, peace bought with your discomfort is not peace, it's performance. and you're not performing anymore. The shift begins quietly. You say no when you mean no. You step away when the energy feels wrong. You don't justify, don't explain, don't shrink. Not because you're trying to be cold, but because you're finally being clear. You're not rejecting others, you're accepting yourself. Finally. At first, it's uncomfortable. The weight of unfamiliar silence, the absence of people who once relied on your inability to set limits. It stings when they say you've changed, as if change isn't exactly what you needed. But you don't argue anymore. You let them go. Because if your worth was tied to your silence, they were never holding you. They were holding the mask you wore. You begin to see that the more you gave, the more people expected. The less you spoke up, the more they took. That's the price of being agreeable. It earns you a seat at the table, but only if you stay quiet. It makes you feel needed, but never truly seen. And now you're tired of being seen as useful, but not valuable. So you rise. Not with rage, but with resolve. You stop trying to earn the respect that should have been given freely. You stop bending to stay lovable. You stop editing your truth so others feel comfortable. Because the real you, the one who speaks up, sets boundaries, walks away from what doesn't feel right, she is worthy too. And when you step into this version of yourself, everything begins to shift. People notice. They talk to you differently. They pause before they ask too much. They sense your standards without you having to announce them. Your presence has changed, not louder, just more rooted. Not hard, but firm. And it's enough. You no longer need to over-explain your boundaries. You don't repeat yourself to justify your no. You've realized that respect doesn't require a presentation. It simply requires consistency. So your life becomes simpler. Not because it's easy, but because it's finally honest. And that honesty becomes your home. There's a new kind of silence now. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of strength. You don't feel the need to fill every gap with words, to soften every truth with disclaimers. You trust the power of your presence. You trust that the right people don't need you to prove yourself over and over. They see you, they hear you, they honor you. This new chapter teaches you that God never called you to be used by people. He called you to serve with love, yes, but not at the cost of your dignity. There is a difference between being loving and being used, between being sacrificial and being silenced. You no longer confuse the two. Sometimes love looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like leaving the room. Sometimes it looks like distance, not because you're angry, but because your heart needs room to breathe. You learn that love, when it's healthy, creates space, not pressure. You no longer stay in places where you're only remembered when someone needs something. You no longer hand out pieces of your soul like they're disposable. You were not made to live in fragments. You were made to live whole. And that wholeness, you begin to guard it like the sacred gift it is. Some people stay, some people leave. But this time you don't chase either. You watch with open eyes and a steady heart. The ones who rise to meet your new standards? You welcome them with gratitude. The ones who resist, you release them with peace. Because now you know, your job was never to make others comfortable with your boundaries. It was to honor them. And you do. Not perfectly, but consistently. Not without fear, but without regret. Because every time you choose yourself, every time you draw the line and hold it, you become more of the woman you were always meant to be. You no longer measure love by how much you're willing to endure. You stop believing that compromise means losing yourself. You stop trying to contort your spirit into shapes that make others comfortable, because now your comfort matters too. Your joy matters too. Your peace matters too. You've spent years confusing sacrifice with strength. You gave more, stayed longer, bent deeper, all hoping it would finally be enough. That someone would see the effort, the loyalty, the exhaustion behind your smile. That someone would say, you don't have to carry all of this. But they didn't. They just kept taking. And you kept giving, until you had nothing left but your breath. And even that felt like it belonged to someone else. That's when it hit you. Love is not meant to drain. It's meant to fill. Real love doesn't hide behind obligation or convenience. It shows up. It stays. It grows. And once you understood that, you stopped chasing. You stopped hoping that someone might change if you just held on longer. You realized that your value is not proven by how much you tolerate. So you stopped performing. You stopped being agreeable at your own expense. You stopped holding space for people who never held you. You stopped giving out access like it was a discount ticket to your soul. And that's when the shift deepened. You started reclaiming your time. You began noticing who drains your energy and who pours into it. You began filtering your relationships through the lens of reciprocity, not transaction, but mutual care. Not attention, but intention. And the difference was unmistakable. Those who were only attached to your convenience faded. The ones who expected you to be available at all times, who called you selfish when you said no, who labeled your growth as attitude, they disappeared. Not because you pushed them, but because they were never built for the woman you were becoming. It's not that you stopped loving people, you just stopped abandoning yourself to do it. You stopped loving people who only loved the easy version of you, the one who didn't speak up, the one who never challenged, the one who said yes before she even knew the question. Now, you wait, you pause, you check in with yourself before you agree. You ask, does this align with my peace, with my purpose, with my values? And if it doesn't, you let it pass. You don't explain it. You don't apologize for it. You just honor it. Quietly, powerfully, how you understand. Your time is sacred. Your energy is limited. Your presence is not free. You are a whole world, not a convenience store for other people's needs. And those who cannot meet you there at your full self are not meant to walk with you in this season. And in that clarity, you breathe. You exhale years of holding in your truth, years of stretching yourself thin to be palatable, likable, acceptable. You no longer want to be digestible. You want to be real. You want to be raw, kind, direct, present, not perfect, not polished, but honest. You start building a life around that honesty, around that alignment. You stop romanticizing red flags. You stop fantasizing about potential. You don't want to build love out of hope anymore. You want it rooted in truth, in shared effort, in mutual respect. And when someone shows you who they are, you believe them. The first time. You no longer explain away mistreatment. You no longer water down your intuition. You trust yourself now, fully, without needing validation from anyone else. You no longer outsource your clarity. You are the authority on your life. And because of that, you walk lighter. Not because your life is easier, but because your spirit is no longer carrying what doesn't belong to you. You've stopped volunteering for pain that was never yours to carry. You've stopped playing savior. You've stopped hoping that your love could fix someone's refusal to grow. Now your love is not desperate. It's deliberate. It's given where it's returned. It's shared with those who nurture it, not drain it. And in that space, you thrive. Quietly, unapologetically, joyfully. You smile more now. Not because everything's perfect, but because you're finally at peace with imperfection. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to explain every decision. You just need to stay aligned, to stay anchored in truth. And you are. You rest more now. You listen to your body. You honor your limits. You don't run on empty anymore to keep others full. You've stopped glorifying burnout. You know that rest is resistance, that rest is power, that your body is not a machine, it's a temple. And you treat it like one. You're no longer in a rush. You trust divine timing. You trust your own rhythm. You don't compare your journey. You don't envy someone else's lane. You've learned that comparison is the thief of clarity, and clarity is your currency now. So you protect it. This life you're building, it's not for show, it's not for likes, it's not for validation, it's for legacy, it's for truth, it's for peace. And you're building it brick by brick, with every boundary, every no, every moment of honesty that says, I will not betray myself again. You are no longer seeking to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. And that changes everything. You begin to see yourself with new eyes, not through the lens of who others wanted you to be, but through the truth of who you've always been. You start to recognize the ways you've hidden in plain sight, the ways you kept yourself small just to avoid rejection. And now that no longer feels acceptable. You're done shrinking, done minimizing, done pretending you're fine when you're not. You've learned to tell the truth, first to yourself and then to others. You speak with more clarity now, fewer words, more weight. You don't need to justify what you know in your spirit. You trust your gut the way you used to trust their excuses. And this trust in yourself becomes your compass. Your standards rise, not as a wall, but as a filter. You're no longer available for connections that leave you feeling empty. You don't want to be tolerated, you want to be treasured. You don't want to be managed, you want to be met. And so, you walk away from anything that teaches you to settle for less than mutuality. And yes, that comes with loss. The loss of roles you played for too long. The loss of identities that were never yours. The loss of people who were only in love with your compliance. But in that loss, you find yourself. In that shedding, you uncover what was always waiting. The real you. The one who didn't need fixing, just space to breathe. You learn that boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're about saying yes to what matters. Yes to rest. Yes to purpose. Yes to the kind of peace that doesn't require silence. You build your life around that peace now. You design your days with intention. You no longer fill your calendar to feel important. You are important, whether you're doing or simply being. And in this space, the right people find you. Not because you chase them, but because you've become a lighthouse. You no longer dim to attract, you shine to repel what isn't meant for you. You don't need a crowd to feel seen. You don't need noise to feel alive. Your presence speaks before you do, and it speaks truth. You laugh more, you cry without shame. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. You no longer tolerate relationships that require you to filter your emotions. You choose honesty over harmony when necessary. You've stopped being easy to consume and started being impossible to ignore. You see now that every time you abandoned yourself to be accepted, you were reinforcing the belief that you were too much. But you were never too much. You were just with people who couldn't hold your depth. Now you hold it, you honor it, you protect it. You no longer chase after love that comes with a leash. You no longer confuse attachment with affection. You look for consistency, not intensity. You seek alignment, not attention. You crave connection, not control. You're no longer intoxicated by potential. You don't date red flags with optimism. You don't justify mistreatment with memory. You no longer excuse behavior that makes your soul shrink. You require truth, effort, and presence. And you bring that same standard to yourself. You show up for your goals. You honor your emotions. You celebrate your progress even when no one sees it. You've become the friend, the partner, the supporter you once tried to be for everyone else. But now you start with you. There's no more apologizing for needing space, no more guilt for resting, no more shame for speaking up. You don't ask permission to heal anymore. You just heal. And in that process, you become whole. Not because others poured into you, but because you finally stopped pouring yourself out for people who were never thirsty. You reclaim your narrative. You rewrite the chapters that once made you feel powerless. You stop centering people who never made space for you. You give yourself closure. You choose freedom over familiarity. You walk away without drama, just direction. And in that direction, you find your rhythm again. The one you had before the world told you who to be. The one that pulses with clarity, with peace, with sacred resolve. You are no longer waiting for life to give you permission. You are living like you belong, because you do. This is the fruit of choosing yourself. Not isolation, but intimacy. Not ego, but alignment. Not walls, but wisdom. You are not hard, you are whole. You are not selfish, you are sovereign. You are not broken, you are becoming. You no longer seek safety in others, you carry it within you. You no longer need a map, you are the compass. You no longer fear the unknown, you trust the unfolding. Because when you stopped being the nice girl, you started becoming the truest version of yourself. And nothing could be more beautiful than that. You now understand that wholeness isn't something you wait for someone else to hand to you. It's something you build, brick by brick, through your choices, your boundaries, your truths. You no longer sacrifice your self-worth on the altar of connection. You've learned that any connection that costs you your voice, your peace, or your joy is far too expensive. You've stopped glorifying struggle. You no longer romanticize relationships that keep you guessing. You no longer equate chaos with love or inconsistency with passion. You no longer confuse being needed with being valued. You've matured past the illusions that once felt like hope, and now you crave only what's real. You start to embrace simplicity, not as a lack, but as a gift. Your life doesn't need to be loud to be meaningful. You don't need dramatic gestures to feel seen. You don't need big crowds to feel loved. You've discovered the power of stillness, of quiet mornings, of honest conversations. You begin to thrive in places where your soul can rest, not perform. You're no longer addicted to being chosen. You no longer live on the edge of someone else's attention span. You've come to realize that the love that changes you the most isn't the kind you chase. It's the kind that honors your stillness, your growth, your boundaries. And you've stopped negotiating with anyone who doesn't understand that. You are no longer the emotional caretaker in one-sided connections. You've laid down the cape. You've stopped trying to fix people who are never willing to heal themselves. You understand now that healing isn't something you can do for someone else. It's a decision they must make. And you no longer pay the price for their indecision. You've become deeply intentional about who gets access to your energy. Not everyone with good intentions is good for you. Not everyone who wants your time deserves it. You give freely, but not foolishly. You love without fear, but not without discernment. You lead with grace, but never again at the cost of your self-respect. You now create sacred distance when needed. You understand that protecting your peace sometimes means disappointing others, and you've made peace with that too. You no longer bend over backward to be understood. You'd rather be whole and misunderstood than fragmented and praised. Your life is no longer measured by how much you can give until it hurts. It's measured by how deeply you can live in your truth without guilt. You've stopped expecting others to rescue you. You've stopped waiting for someone else to affirm what your soul already knows. You've become your own advocate, your own safe place, your own steady ground. And you've realized you are enough, even when you're not convenient. You are enough, even when you say no. You are enough, even when you choose rest over productivity, solitude over performance, boundaries over approval. Now your inner world dictates your outer world. You're no longer chasing alignment, you're cultivating it. You are choosing peace over noise, depth over distraction, substance over surface. You are done being busy to feel worthy. You're done proving, pushing, pleasing. You've stepped into a new rhythm, one that feels honest and sustainable and sacred. You're in no rush. You've learned that divine timing never asks you to sprint towards someone else's finish line. You trust that what's for you will find you, not through chasing, but through resting in truth. Through doing your work. Through staying faithful to your path, even when it's quiet. And because you stopped being the nice girl, you now see life through a clearer lens. You don't carry what isn't yours. You don't bleed to keep others warm. You don't dilute your values for temporary companionship. And in doing so, you've made room for grace, for clarity, for people who love you as you are. People who don't flinch when you draw a boundary. People who don't disappear when you stop over-functioning. People who aren't intimidated by your wholeness. They honor your fire without trying to tame it. They respect your yes and your no. They see your worth and reflect it, not question it. And even if they haven't arrived yet, you're not afraid. You've learned how to sit in the space between what was and what's becoming. You've learned how to hold joy without clinging, how to grieve without drowning, how to hope without needing. You are anchored now, not in people, not in outcomes, but in yourself. You no longer fear being alone. You no longer define your life by who stays or who goes. You are at home within yourself, and that home is built on solid ground. So when life asks you to rise, you rise. When life asks you to release, you release. When life asks you to rest, you rest. Because this is the woman you are now. Not the nice girl, but the real woman, unfiltered, unbothered, unbreakable. You now walk with an inner steadiness that can't be shaken by rejection or praise. You're not swayed by trends or expectations. You're grounded in who you are, and that alone has become your compass. You don't pivot every time someone disapproves. You don't crumble under pressure to conform. You've found a center so deep that no storm can uproot you. It wasn't always this way. You remember the version of you that flinched at every raised voice, that panicked at every moment of silence, that tried to fix every uncomfortable situation just to feel safe. You remember the exhaustion of holding together what was never meant to last. You remember the anxiety of feeling like you had to earn your spot in every room. But now, you no longer live on edge. You've reclaimed your edges. You've softened without folding, and strengthened without hardening. You're not trying to be everything to everyone anymore. You've made peace with being misunderstood. You've let go of the need to be seen by those who only knew how to love your silence. You've stopped over-explaining yourself. You trust your no. You trust your intuition. You no longer debate your worth in conversations where your soul feels invisible. If the energy feels off, you exit. If the connection feels one-sided, you don't linger. If the relationship costs your peace, you stop paying. You don't settle for being almost loved, halfway supported, conditionally respected. You no longer wait for someone else to choose you. You choose yourself. Not once, but daily. In every choice, in every boundary, in every honest conversation that honors your truth instead of hiding it. You are deeply clear about what you will and won't accept. Not out of ego, but out of reverence for your own spirit. You've walked through too many fires to let someone else dim your flame. You've rebuilt too many times to let another person's confusion undo your clarity. You are no longer afraid of solitude. You've come to see it as sacred. As a place where your thoughts have room to breathe, where your heart has time to heal, where your voice can rise without competition. It is in solitude that you've met the most important version of yourself, the one who's not seeking but remembering, not chasing but allowing, not performing but simply being. And that being has become your superpower. It's in your posture, your tone, your stillness. You don't need to prove your strength. It's obvious in your peace. You don't need to defend your worth. It's written in your presence. You don't need to justify your choices. They reflect your evolution. You love more truthfully now. Not with fear, not with desperation, but with clarity. You're not afraid to walk away from someone you love if they're not walking in the same direction. You're not afraid to say, "This no longer works for me," even if it once meant everything. Because you've stopped treating love like a reward for endurance and started treating it as a reflection of alignment. You don't run after what's pulling away. You bless it, release it, and make room. Because the woman you are now doesn't hold on to what hurts, hoping it will heal. She holds herself with care and trusts that healing is not found in clinging, but in letting go. This version of you, she's not lost, she's arrived. She's not confused, she's convicted. She's not loud, but she's powerful. And her power doesn't come from control, it comes from surrender. Surrendering the need to be everything, to fix everything, to hold everyone together. She's learned that her only job is to remain true. You are now building a life with your own hands, your own voice, your own rhythm. You wake up each day with a clearer sense of who you are and what you need. You no longer force what feels off. You no longer keep what doesn't reciprocate. You live with open hands and a guarded heart, not out of fear, but out of self-honor. And in this space, joy returns. Quiet joy, sacred joy, not the fleeting kind that depends on someone else's attention, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you are finally living in alignment. You're not overwhelmed by the future because you trust yourself in the present. You're not haunted by the past because you've forgiven the version of you who didn't know better. You've made peace with her, and now you protect her. You now understand that being the nice girl was never about being kind. It was about being small enough to be accepted. And you're done with smallness. You're done with shrinking. You're done with waiting for someone else to hand you your power. Because you've already claimed it, quietly, clearly, completely. And from here, you live. Not cautiously, but courageously. Not for their approval, but for your truth. Not for survival, but for joy. And now, every part of your life begins to mirror the woman you've become. Your relationships reflect mutuality, not martyrdom. Your work aligns with your values, not your need to prove. Your home becomes a sanctuary, not a stage. You no longer build your life around how to be accepted. You build it around how to be at peace. You've learned that peace isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice you make again and again, especially in moments when it would be easier to fall back into old patterns. But you've outgrown those patterns. You've outgrown performing perfection, apologizing for your presence, and shrinking to avoid discomfort. There's nothing small about you anymore. You speak when it matters. You rest when you're tired. You leave when it's time. You celebrate yourself without waiting for permission. You no longer dim your light so others feel better about their shadows. You've learned that your light is not a threat, it's a guide for you and for those walking beside you. You've stopped being impressed by the bare minimum. Words no longer sway you, consistency does. Apologies no longer convince you, changed behavior does. You no longer fall for charm, you wait for character. You don't cling to potential, you choose patterns. You no longer build futures on hope alone, you build with truth, effort, and alignment. You're done making excuses for people who don't show up. You're done explaining your boundaries to those who've already crossed them. You're done revisiting chapters you've outgrown. The door you once kept cracked for people to return, it's closed now, with love, but with finality. And in that closure, something opens in you. A new confidence rises. Not the performative kind that shouts, but the grounded kind that whispers, I trust myself. You trust your no. You trust your intuition. You trust the wisdom that comes from listening to your body, your emotions, your silence. You don't just know who you are, you live like it. You're not pretending to be okay anymore, you're actually okay. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've learned how to be at home within yourself, even when everything around you shifts. Your life now feels like your own. Not borrowed, not filtered, not dictated by someone else's comfort. You've stopped asking for permission to evolve. You've stopped waiting for others to catch up to your growth. You've learned that some people will never understand your healing, and that's not your burden to carry. You're not looking back anymore, not at who you were, not at who they wanted you to be, not at the doors you once begged to be opened. You're moving forward, not faster, but freer. Not with urgency, but with trust. You carry your lessons, not your baggage. You carry your standards, not your scars. You carry your softness, but it's wrapped in steel. You are grace and grit, you are truth and tenderness. You are both rooted and rising. And the world may not always know what to do with a woman like you. A woman who stopped being agreeable to become authentic. A woman who stopped asking, do they approve, and started asking, does this align? A woman who no longer sacrifices herself for connection, but creates connection from a place of fullness. But that's okay. You didn't come here to be understood by everyone. You came to live a life that feels like truth in your bones. A life that doesn't demand that you split yourself into pieces to be loved. You're no longer afraid of your strength. You're no longer ashamed of your sensitivity. You're no longer running from your own depth. You are all of it now, and you carry it with intention. You've rewritten the rules, you've reshaped the narrative, you've restored your voice, and you're just getting started. Because when you stopped being the nice girl, you didn't just change your life, you reclaimed it. Fully, finally, forever. You don't chase peace anymore, you embody it. It shows in the way you pause before responding, the way you no longer fill empty space with nervous words, the way you trust silence as a companion rather than a threat. There is power in that stillness, a deep, unwavering strength that no longer needs to explain itself to be understood. You've stopped seeing boundaries as walls. They're gates now, open to what nourishes you, closed to what depletes you. You no longer leave those gates unguarded. You no longer feel guilty for protecting your soul. What once felt like selfishness now feels like self-honor. What once seemed like confrontation now looks like clarity. You now walk into rooms with the quiet certainty that you belong, not because you're pleasing or perfect or palatable, but because you're present, fully present. No longer fragmented by the need to appease or adjust. You've stopped contorting yourself into the versions that others preferred. You've chosen to be whole rather than convenient. And the beauty of this version of you is that she's not hardened, she's healed. Not untouchable, but discerning. Not guarded, but intentional. You haven't built walls, you've planted roots. You've learned that love without truth isn't love. That connection without respect isn't connection. That kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's erasure. So you speak. Not to be right, but to be real. You listen. Not to respond, but to understand. You stay where you're valued and walk away when you're not. And you don't apologize for the difference. You've stopped asking, what do they think of me, and started asking, how does this feel to my spirit? Because you finally trust your spirit's answer. You've stopped proving yourself in places that were never meant for your light. You no longer waste energy trying to change people who benefit from your silence. You don't fix what wasn't yours to break. You don't stay where your presence is only appreciated when it's easy. And yet, you love more deeply than ever. With open hands, with clear eyes, with steady heartbeats that no longer race from anxiety, but pulse from peace. Because the love you give now is rooted in truth. And the love you accept now is filtered through wisdom. You no longer build futures on fantasy, you build them on foundation. You trust yourself to walk away. You trust yourself to begin again. You trust that you won't lose what's real by being real, that you won't miss out on love by honoring your own. You've learned that grief and growth walk together, and you've made peace with their pace. Now you don't fear endings, you see them as invitations to expand, to return, to rise. You've come to know that being misunderstood is a small price to pay for being aligned. That being alone for a while is far better than being divided for a lifetime. That being soft doesn't mean being stepped on. That being honest doesn't mean being harsh. You are not bitter, you're clear. You are not mean, you're direct. You are not selfish, you're awake. This is the life you were meant to live, not one where your worth is always on trial. Not one where your needs are labeled too much. Not one where your love is only accepted if it's quiet, compliant, and contained. You now know your love is sacred. Your presence is a gift. Your voice is not a burden, it's a blessing. And your spirit, it's no longer for sale. This is what happens when you stop being the nice girl. You live without apology. You give without depletion. You walk without fear. You love without losing yourself. You become the woman who no longer waits for permission to be whole, because you already are. You don't need noise to feel alive anymore. You don't crave chaos to feel worthy. The calm you once ran from has become your refuge. The stillness that used to feel like punishment now feels like permission. You no longer search for meaning in other people's moods, nor do you shapeshift to avoid disappointment. You've stopped negotiating your needs in exchange for temporary affection. You've come home to yourself in a way that no relationship, job, or title could offer. The world might still ask you to conform, to be sweet, agreeable, easy, but your soul refuses. Not because you're rebellious, but because you're remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be free before you were taught to be small. Remembering the version of you that laughed without shrinking, cried without shame, and asked for what she needed without guilt. You've stopped glorifying struggle. You no longer wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. You rest unapologetically. You create margins in your life for silence, for recovery, for joy. You've learned that you don't have to collapse in order to be seen. You don't have to break down to be loved. You don't have to prove your pain to earn compassion. You offer yourself compassion first. You no longer wait to feel safe to be yourself. You become your own safety. You hold space for your emotions without labeling them as too much. You stop analyzing your intuition like it's irrational. You believe your body when it whispers discomfort, when it tenses around people who don't feel right. You honor that wisdom now. You don't just survive anymore. You choose. You choose where to invest your energy. You choose what environments you enter. You choose what thoughts you entertain. You are not obligated to sit through every conversation you're invited to. You don't need to stay in rooms that drain you just to prove your loyalty. You've stopped mistaking endurance for love. Your priorities have changed. Peace is no longer negotiable. Self-abandonment is no longer an option. Reciprocity is no longer a bonus, it's a baseline. You don't extend grace to patterns that harm you. You don't offer second chances to those who trample your first boundary. You no longer confuse being available with being valuable. Now your yes is earned, your no is respected. Your silence is not emptiness, it's sovereignty. You don't need to be loud to be heard. The steadiness in your tone says enough. The way you leave when disrespected speaks volumes. You don't need to explain why you're not the same anymore. You're not seeking understanding, you're seeking alignment. You've made peace with being the villain in someone else's story. You know that some will only love you when you're convenient and hate you when you're clear. But you don't carry that weight anymore. You've stopped editing yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. You've stopped shrinking your power to protect their ego. You've also released the version of you that constantly second-guessed her choices. The one who replayed every conversation, who dissected every silence, who apologized for things she didn't even do. She needed to be loved. She needed to belong. But now you belong to yourself first. And that changes everything. You no longer trade your integrity for intimacy. You no longer abandon your boundaries to avoid conflict. You've stopped giving explanations to people committed to misunderstanding you. You realize now that not everyone deserves access to your clarity. Some only want your presence as long as it makes them comfortable. The moment it becomes real, they retreat, and you let them. You don't chase clarity from people who thrive in confusion. You don't beg for honesty from those who live in half-truths. You don't chase closure. You create it. You don't wait for someone else to give you the permission to move on. You walk out the door and close it gently behind you. Because now you understand. Healing doesn't always come with a final conversation. Growth doesn't require validation. And closure is something you give to yourself when you decide to stop bleeding for people who never asked if you were okay. You've become your own witness, your own companion, your own rescue. The parts of you that once searched for heroes now realize she was always within you. You've learned how to self-soothe, how to hold your own hand, how to breathe through discomfort instead of running from it. You now build relationships from your wholeness, not your wounds. You love from fullness, not fear. You listen more, speak less, and when you do speak, your words are rooted in truth. You don't shout to be heard. You don't plead to be chosen. You simply are, and that presence alone shifts the energy of every room you walk into. You've stopped romanticizing potential. You don't project possibility onto patterns anymore. You don't justify inconsistency with maybe they'll change. You watch actions now. You listen for consistency. You trust your nervous system more than sweet words. You've set a new standard, not just for how others treat you, but for how you treat yourself. You give yourself grace on the hard days. You celebrate your smallest wins. You look in the mirror and you no longer see lack, you see legacy. You see the woman who stayed when everyone else walked away, the woman who chose truth even when it cost her comfort. Because this is who you are now. And the woman you've become doesn't need to be the nice girl anymore. She's the real girl, the healed girl, the honest girl, the free one. You no longer look outside yourself for direction. You've learned that the compass you were searching for was always within, buried beneath conditioning, beneath fear, beneath the layers of performance you wore to survive. But now, every step you take is yours. Every word you speak is yours. Every decision you make, every silence you keep, every boundary you hold, it all belongs to you. And that's what freedom feels like. You no longer confuse quietness with weakness. You no longer mistake stillness for stagnation. You now know that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes, sometimes it waits, sometimes it simply walks away without looking back. You've stopped chasing closure and started creating peace. You've stopped defending yourself and started believing yourself. You've stopped needing to be understood and started understanding yourself. You no longer identify with the version of you who was always available, always agreeable, always depleted. You honor her, yes, she got you through so much, but you've outgrown her now. She laid the foundation, but you're building the home. You've walked through fire and come out clearer, not untouched, but unafraid. You've discovered that your softness is a strength, that your tears are sacred, that your truth has power, even when your voice trembles. You no longer apologize for being sensitive. You now see it as your superpower. You no longer see rest as laziness. You now honor it as renewal. You no longer tolerate the kind of love that asks you to be less, because you've tasted what it means to be loved as you are, starting with how you love yourself. You are no longer afraid to take up space. You're no longer afraid to take your time. You're no longer afraid to take your life back. You've stopped waiting for permission. You've stopped shrinking in rooms where your presence is too bright. You've stopped asking, is this too much, and started asking, is this true to me? You don't need a crowd anymore. You need depth. You don't need to be praised. You need to be seen. You don't need to be saved. You've already rescued yourself. And now, from this place of grounded clarity, you create. You give. You rest. You rise. You walk into your future unburdened. Not because you've avoided the pain, but because you've faced it. Not because you've had all the answers, but because you've asked the right questions. You've stopped waiting for someone else to name your worth and started living like it's unquestionable. This is what happens when you stop being the nice girl. You stop being the fixer, the peacekeeper, the background. You become the boundary, the truth, the center. You don't need to be palatable to be powerful. You don't need to be chosen to be whole. You don't need to be liked to be worthy. You are already all of those things. So keep choosing yourself, again and again, even when it's quiet, even when it's hard, even when no one claps, especially then, because this is the real you. Not the nice girl, not the edited girl, not the version of you shaped by fear, but the woman who knows who she is and lives like it. And as you move forward, may every step be sacred, may every no be honored, may every yes come from truth. And may you never again forget that being kind to yourself is the most revolutionary thing you'll ever do. If this message spoke to your soul, stay with us. Subscribe to Think Fresh Daily, where we celebrate truth, healing, and the courage to live fully as you are. The next video continues the journey, one step deeper, one breath braver. You don't want to miss it.